Hello coffee consumers and crime connoisseurs, welcome to the 22nd episode of Mugshot Mornings, where we explore true crime one sip at a time. Today's episode is one of the cults that is very recent that I never heard about, so let me give you an introduction. So imagine a self-help organization that promises to unlock your full potential. They offer elite training programs, professional success, and inner peace. There is a charismatic leader with devoted followers, and it seems that it has attracted thousands of people who are eager to improve their lives. So you join. But behind the seminars and workshops lies a manipulative system with a web of secrets and dark intentions. NXIVM is a story of control, devotion, brainwashing, and deplorable acts of a cult leader and his followers, Keith Raniere. Before we get into the story, for those of you who don't know, my name is Sydney. I am the host of the podcast of Mugshot Mornings. It's just me. I do all the editing. I do all of the researching, the filming, everything in that manner. And Happy New Year, everyone. I know that I didn't post last week. I did tell you guys that during the holidays I was going to take a break. I was going to come back last week, and I don't know if y'all follow like my community tag on YouTube, but I did post that iMovie deleted everything. I still have it on my camera, but I took it as a sign that I shouldn't do that episode. It wasn't anything bad, but as I was editing it, I was already kind of having like I don't want to come back in the new year with this one. It's like I don't know, I've also kind of filmed it weird. Like, I don't think I was in a good mood to film that day because I was very just off. So maybe it was a sign. I don't know. Again, if you're new, my name is Sydney, and I incorporate coffee with true crime, conspiracies, cults, and things like that. So today, like I said, we are talking about a cult. But before we get into that, what are we sipping on? I did steal this coffee mug from Colorado, and I'm not going to apologize about it. We went to this German restaurant with my sister and my brother-in-law. They got married in Vail, Colorado. I don't remember what I got, but I mean, like, they reused their mugs because you can tell, like, based off of the chipping right here. And so what are we sipping on? I made a hot latte, and I did white chocolate and pumpkin spice. So it's like the coffee shop that I normally go to mixes white chocolate and pumpkin during the like October times. So, and he calls it like a pumpkin pie something. I don't remember. Bruno, if you're listening, what do you do? So I kind of tried to copy what he did, and I'm still not good at steaming milk. I don't know the method behind it because I can't do any art, but it's very good. And I'm drinking a hot coffee because it snowed in Arkansas. Now, do we like the new? If not, it's okay. I didn't work hard on it at all. New background-ish. I'm still working on it, okay? I still want to do more like a little bit of eerie because this is like comic true crime art, and then right here, sorry, I'm looking in the monitor, and then right here is like a 1960s like alien abduction styled photo. I don't know. And then obviously this hasn't gone anywhere. It's all of my like creepy books, so it's like female killers, serial killers, things like that. Okay, before we get into the story, because we do have a long one today, you guys, let me know down below, how was your Christmas? How was your New Year? How are you doing? Is everything okay? Today's story I only recently heard of. It really only took place like a few years ago, but hold on, let me back up. The courts and trials and stuff only took like 4 years ago, maybe. This one's wild, okay? This one's gonna get you. So I do want to give a trigger warning to some people because it might be hard to listen to. It's kind of hard to listen to, but it's very interesting. This case is very crazy because it is a sex cult that is kind of disguised as like an MLM and like a pyramid scheme based off of the story leading up to it, of Keith's story before he even started all of this. You can kind of understand why he disguised it as such. So let's get into today's story. NXIVM, and if you look on the screen or if you look it up, it is not spelled the way that you think. It is NXIVM, pronounced as NXIVM, was created in 1998 by Keith Raniere and Nancy Salzman. Keith was born an only child in Brooklyn, New York on August 26, 1960 to James and Vera Raniere. James was an advertising executive who was often not present at home, and his mother Vera was a professional dancer, instructor, and she mainly focused on the ballroom dance. However, the two kind of had a rocky marriage because when Keith was only 8 years old, his parents divorced, and it had a pretty strong effect on him, and his mother also started drinking really heavily. But Keith said that this was not an excessive amount. He kind of played it off as just the divorce. It was known that both parents thought that Keith was the apple of their eye. Keith's father also really spoke highly of Keith, saying how intelligent he was and how he was going to be great at doing anything that he does in his life, which kind of sets it up for a foreshadow for the story. Now, like I said, the divorce really did kind of affect Keith, and so to kind of cope with the stress of everything, he started to read books. These were not like Magic Treehouse, Goosebumps, like those styled books that we read whenever we were around this age. It was the art of manipulation and mind control books. In ninth grade, Keith attended Suffern High School. So he transferred to this school after his parents' divorce. Like, they were living in Brooklyn and then moved to Suffern, New York, which was not super far, but it did have him have to change schools. So he was attending Suffern High School in ninth grade, and then he transferred to Rockland Country Day School. During this time, Keith started working for a very popular MLM company called Amway. And so before I get into what Amway is, I kind of need to give a background to what an MLM is. Now, an MLM stands for multi-level marketing, and it is basically a pyramid scheme. Now, the best way that I can explain this is for especially women. Have you ever had someone from your high school or someone randomly message you asking if you want to be your own boss, if you want to make your own schedule, talking about supplements that can make you lose weight, like without saying, "Hey, fatty"? What they do is they ask you to buy their product, so it makes them a commission. It's very commission based, and so you buy all this product, and then you kind of have to do what she just did to you. So you message other people asking if they want to buy your products. So that way, that's the only way that you make your money, is if you sell the product. So you can sell it to friends and family member without recruiting them to do the same thing that you're doing. But it's really hard to do that. Most people can catch on to MLM schemes, but at the time, around this time, most people did not. So we can catch it really quickly when it comes to being your own boss, making your own schedule. You have to make your own money. We can notice what it is. But at this time, it was not as big as what it is now. Many people try to persuade you by saying that it's like networking opportunities, but really it's just for you to buy these overpriced shakes so that people make their money in some way, and they have no benefit to your health at all. Popular MLM pyramid schemes are Avon, Mary Kay, Herbalife, and even Amway, which Keith worked for. Keith's job at Amway was to pretty much go door to door trying to sell these supplements, and since he was really good at talking to people, he started to use some of the tricks he learned in the mind control books to benefit him into selling the products. Keith was described by the Rockland County School headmaster as a brilliant student of math and science, and he was well prepared for college academically, socially, and emotionally. Keith attended a Polytechnical Institute known as RPI in June 1978 and graduated in 1982. So you're probably starting to think Keith is really intelligent. He graduated from this prestigious school. He's being talked about really highly of his academics and just how intelligent he is, but he really wasn't applying himself when he was in college and got a 2.26 GPA due to him not attending classes, failing classes, and just not trying. Before he graduated, one of the main reasons why he stopped was he was trying to create his own MLM after working from Amway that he called Consumer Byline. While he was trying to get his MLM up and running, the production of it was taking far too long. He started a career as a computer programmer for the New York State Division of Parole. However, he did not give up his business model because in 1990, Consumer Byline was actually starting to pick up the pace, exactly what he wanted. Consumer Byline started to get employees, and around this time, it was said to be one of the fastest growing MLMs. But he didn't want this to be a door-to-door selling the product styled MLM. He wanted it to be a buying coupons, and he wanted people to save money by buying these coupons. It didn't make sense. What he did was he created basically a monthly membership for these people to buy the coupons, and it would be sent to them. So instead of it being like kind of like a product, you're getting something out of it that actually was worth it. But obviously, MLMs are a scheme, and these coupons were found to be a part of a pyramid scheme, and so he started being investigated. But before that, one of his employees named Tony Natalie, they started to fall quickly head over heels in love with each other. Only after 3 months of dating, Tony and Keith were engaged, so their relationship moved pretty fast. This was a good time in his life, even though there were obvious signs of this being a scheme. Consumer Byline was bringing about $33 million in per year for the few years that he had it going. Around 250,000 people signed up for these coupon memberships, but only after 3 years of the Consumer Byline business, the state of New York filed a lawsuit against Keith stating that his business was illegal and reported it to be a pyramid scheme. So this kind of started his downfall. Instead of Keith trying to fight this lawsuit, he pretty much just closed this business, but not before working on a second MLM company that he called the National Health Network. This MLM was back to what he first originally did when he was a teenager with Amway, which was selling supplements and weight loss pills. However, in 1996, only a few years after this as well, I couldn't find if this one did just as well as Consumer Byline, but either way, the police got involved, saw that it was a pyramid scheme, and they shut it down again. Keith had to pay over $40,000 and sign a contract by saying that he's not going to continue another distribution scheme, meaning that once one MLM fails, he's not going to continue trying to find another MLM to create. Basically, like, stop, like, when we get involved. And in this, don't start a new one. So he had to sign a contract saying that he was not going to continue doing that. Tony pretty much just kind of followed whatever Keith did. So when the two were engaged and she no longer had a job, he no longer had a business, and they were no longer making money, she was kind of stuck on what she wanted to do. So she went to her friend named Nancy Salzman. Earlier, you remember me saying Nancy Salzman in the introduction, so you can kind of see where this is going. Tony is explaining to Nancy that she's kind of worried if she got involved with someone that's kind of dangerous, like Keith, who is just a schemer. And Nancy's like, well, what if I go talk to him? So Tony's trying to find comfort in Nancy, and Nancy's like, I can go talk to him and see kind of where you're leading with that. Why do you feel this way? So Nancy agrees, and Tony does not hear from Nancy for 4 days. When Nancy returns, she tells Tony, you don't know him. He is going to change the world. He is light years ahead of us. Tony mentioned that when Nancy spoke of Keith, there was a glimmer in her eye of infatuation. And of course, Tony and Keith divorce, and right after, Nancy and Keith start dating. So allegedly, Nancy was the second best in the entire state of New York in hypnosis and neuro-linguistic programming. Now, I'm not entirely sure how many people they based this off of, but she was second best in neuro-linguistic programming, which is, I'm going to refer to as NLP because that takes too long to say. So NLP is machine learning technology that allows computers to understand, manipulate, and interpret human language. So it's basically a form of AI. So besides Nancy being a nurse, she also had training and experience with this, which is not a good match with Keith and his experience in manipulative tactics. So you take her experience with NLP and you take Keith's experience with manipulation, and they don't combine well together, but they create a new business. They called it Werner Management Systems, and it was basically another MLM. It was a program for self-improvement, self-enlightenment, and self-love, but when they pitched this company to investors, due to Keith's past, they didn't get any positive feedback or even a single penny. Many of these people possibly knew of Keith's previous scams and schemes of these MLM brands that he is starting up, so they didn't want to invest any money, also knowing that he still owed money to the state of New York. He also signed a contract saying that he wouldn't do something like this, so they didn't want to get involved with it. So now that the word is out that Keith started yet another business and it failed yet again, they decided to change the name from Venery Management Systems to NXIVM. I couldn't find a reason as to why they changed it to this. I mean, who knows why people come up with the names of companies that they do. I couldn't find why they did change it, but it is now known as NXIVM. You see where this is going? So NXIVM was started in July 1998 and it was based in New York. The name of the company is called NXIVM, but inside of NXIVM, they sold something called Executive Success Programs, or otherwise known as ESPs. The ESPs were created to help people achieve personal and professional success by addressing their emotional and psychological barriers. So how Keith kind of portrayed what these ESPs were was that if you buy this, it's almost advice. So he doesn't have a specific product. It's a lecture. So you're going to be going to these lectures of him telling you that you're the reason why the life that you live is the way that it is. So if you want a better life, it's on you. It's no one else. You deserve to live life to the fullest. You deserve to have the best life. Here are some ways and some advice that I can give you to make that happen. So they start hiring people and they get these people to kind of go door to door, just as he did at Amway. And they also stood outside of shopping centers and malls and different grocery stores, like major big grocery stores, to try and bring in as many people as they could. At this time, Keith had to be really careful with this business model because of his previous MLM schemes. So instead of him selling this false advertising product, he's selling false advertising advice. So it's not the same. The thing about the ESPs was that they were an insane amount of money. Keep in mind, this was in the late 90s, so the amount of money I'm about to tell you was a lot of money at the time. So the program had different levels. Level 1, you had to pay $2,700 for 5 days of lectures. Level 2 was $5,100 for 11 days. And level 3 was you pay $7,600 for 16 days. When they would be telling people about these ESPs, they really pushed level 3, of course because of money, but they would manipulate these people by saying, if you don't do level 3, then you're cheap and you really don't want to better your life. You don't really care about spending the money to better your life. You're not dedicated enough if you don't buy level 3. Of course, like I said, it was just because it was $7,600. Even if people did buy level 3 that they probably think they could afford, a lot of people dropped out or didn't finish any of the levels because of how much money they were paying and they couldn't afford it anymore. Now, say that you do finish all 16 days in level 3. You have paid your $7,600 fine. What happens after that? Keith would bring on these bullshit fees by saying, like, if you pay this extra fee, it'll expand your mind further. It's a new product and I have mystic powers. So he would kind of manipulate people into staying by paying these fees that didn't do anything. The advice on these extra programs that they would be paying for was basically what they had been hearing the last 16 days. So it was really just greed at this point. They also had different rankings based on the sashes that were given. So a metallic blue silver sash was the top tiers, which technically was only Keith and Nancy. The bottom tier was an orange sash, which was given to the new members. There were different colors that represented different things, like the different levels that you paid for, how far along you were in the program, etc. So you would retire your color sash for a new different sash the longer that you're in the program. And people that paid the most amount of money were given pretty top-tier sashes, even if they were new members. So basically the sashes were bullshit, and it was basically just based off of the amount of money that you had paid. Basically all 3 levels were the exact same amount of advice. It was just based on the amount of days that you had paid for. So the meetings and these lecture seminar things were held in this random place that you would drive to, and Nancy wheeled out this old TV with a VHS tape of Keith preaching. So he wasn't even there. It was literally you just paying for this videotape. But people were there actually taking notes and listening to what Keith was saying. So obviously he was charismatic and giving advice good enough in some way for people to realize that their money wasn't bullshit. Maybe he's onto something. He would tell people that you are in the way of your own life and you need to be consistent and held accountable for your reasons to not be your best self. Keith and Nancy were being held on this really high regard and put on this pedestal as the reason why their lives are bettering was because of Keith and Nancy. So they didn't see it as someone giving you advice saying like, you're going to go and do great things and all of these like normal advice, people saying you're in the way of your own destiny and things like that. They really took it upon themselves that the positive changes they're seeing in their lives is only directly because of Keith and Nancy. So they're paying for advice that you could literally get from your mom. Like, again, I don't know what it is about these cult leaders that just change people's minds almost entirely. Keith and Nancy started to be referred to as Vanguard and Prefect. Keith supposedly adopted this nickname from the 1981 video game named Vanguard, where destructions of one's enemies increased one's power. So he got this nickname from a video game. Underlying message behind it fits him perfectly. By 2003, there were around 3,700 people taking these ESP classes, and also, allegedly, they had to sign NDAs when they started. Keith and Nancy also started new techniques called rational inquiries, and basically this was to facilitate the personal and professional development. This is later referred to as expensive brainwashing from a cult investigator, but we can already kind of assume that that's what's been going on this whole time. What these rational inquiries were was basically Keith and Nancy were telling these people to change their lives. So again, the same advice that they had been giving for however many days these people paid for, it's the same thing. They're just calling it something different and labeling it as a new term. The only thing that was different with these rational inquiries was that Keith and Nancy kind of started to control your life and the decisions that you started to make, which is where the cult-like mentality starts to kind of climb in. It's already been there, but it's now starting to get more culty. The reason why this cult is so interesting is that this cult is kind of based off of spirituality and not a religion. Now, I'm not saying that spirituality and self-enlightenment is a bad thing in any way. That's not at all what I'm saying. I know many people who are not religious, but they are very spiritual and they do different spiritual practices to just kind of keep bettering their lives, but that is free. And people don't take it to an extreme of this, so you can literally find a lot of self-enlightenment and self-positive quotes on Pinterest. You don't have to pay someone to tell you your worth through a colored sash. Keith is starting to really kind of take this mentality that he is above other people and the leader of this group. So he starts to kind of test the waters by telling people that he has mystical powers. And if you listen to him and do what he says, you too can absorb some of these mystical powers and create mystical powers on your own. So he has had about 5 years of practice for these people at ESP of completely brainwashing them and manipulating them. He has longer years of experience based off of his other failed MLM brands, but he is really taking it to an extreme now by saying he has powers. The people that were taking these ESP classes were very normal civilians, but Keith wanted to take it a step further. He wanted the actors and actresses and billionaires and executives and people with a lot of money to come in and take these classes. The first well-known name was Mark Vincent. Mark was known as a pretty famous producer, and he even helped expose NXIVM later on a show called The Vow. But before this, he entered the cult with an actress named Sarah Edmondson. Sarah was well known for her voice acting in different kids' movies and shows, including Bratz and Barbies. Sarah and Mark had met on a cruise, and she was kind of telling Mark that she was kind of stuck of where she was in life, and she felt that she didn't want to continue doing kids shows anymore. She wanted to move on to more adult roles. And so Mark is telling her, like, I can help you achieve this, because Mark was involved in NXIVM around this time, so he recruited Sarah to come and join. NXIVM had based a lot of its practices on bettering yourself. You are helping achieve your own path, and so Sarah was a very perfect victim for this because she was so vulnerable of wanting to change her life's career. So I don't think that Mark did this in a predator way, meaning like he was trying, because around this time, NXIVM has not elaborated to what we know it as now. It's basically just bullshit advice. MLM, Mark is being a part of that. Come do this and you can change your life. She was a perfect victim for this. I don't think Mark did this intentionally because of what we know later, but it is worth noting that she kind of fell victim to this MLM mentality. Sarah started off with just the 5-day program at level 1 for $2,700 because she couldn't afford any of the other levels. However, she got hooked, and her and Mark quickly grew in the ranks. Mark also was married to a woman named Bonnie, and he recruited her also to NXIVM, but she quickly knew that something was off with this group, and she even called it a scam and cultish from the very beginning. Around this time, NXIVM was very successful. They had thousands of members to the point that they needed to open a second location. Mark and Nancy decided this location should be in Vancouver so they could network to people in a different country. Vancouver is also where famous actress from Smallville, Allison Mack, resided, along with her co-star, Kristen Cruick. So these two women were recruited along with Catherine Oxenberg from Dynasty, and Catherine recruited her daughter, India. Nancy and Keith were thrilled because obviously this is more just about the money, and now they have these really famous actors that are very wealthy being brought into their group. So they don't really care about the members, only money. Now that it's only money and they have these really famous people that have tons of wealth, they can throw on all these fees and they're going to pay them. If they really are taking NXIVM seriously, they'll pay the fees. And a lot of them started to take NXIVM very seriously as they did start seeing positive changes in their lives. Because of course, if you take steps to make changes in your life, it's going to be better. That's just how it goes. You don't have to pay all of these fees of people telling you that they're going to help you achieve that. That's just like normal common sense, I think. In NXIVM, every member each month had to recruit at least one member, and if you didn't, you were kicked out. So a lot of people did drop because they couldn't afford it anymore, but a lot of people kind of started seeing past the bullshit, or who knows, maybe they just couldn't afford it anymore, truly. But some people just didn't recruit members, so they could be kicked out. Allison Mack quickly grew in the ranks due to not only the amount of money that she gave, but how smitten she was by Keith. And Keith saw this and he preyed on it. He started to control her so much that he made her vow and promise that she was only going to be loyal to him. And he started to control all of the decisions that she made, even counting her calories so that she could be a specific weight only for him. Bonnie, Mark's wife that I'd mentioned before, was also someone that Keith would watch her calories. Bonnie ended up getting really malnourished and weak, and her husband Mark would tell her, "You're not malnourished and you're not weak. You just don't want it enough." Remember when I said earlier that Bonnie saw right through it from the very beginning? Well, this was kind of a solidifying factor because now Keith has completely changed her husband's mindset. She realized that this man who she barely knew was controlling her diet, was kissing everyone of all ages, mind you, on the lips, and kicking people out if they ever disagreed with him. He was greedy, he only wanted money, and she was like, yeah, okay, I'm in a cult. When she tried to express her concerns to Mark, he shot her down immediately by saying, we're not in a cult because this isn't like Heaven's Gate, this is self-enlightenment. Bonnie really wanted to leave, but Mark didn't, so it started a long line of a tumultuous relationship between the two, and they eventually did divorce. Now, Bonnie thought after the divorce and leaving NXIVM that it would kind of all be over, but instead it was the complete opposite. Many people took Mark's side, and when Bonnie left, they would blow her phone up constantly in the middle of the night, and when other people left after her, they experienced similar situations. Some members were somehow having their medical insurance canceled, and a lot of people were having a lot of credit card fraud, random charges showing up on their account, so somebody in NXIVM was stealing money out of their account still even after they left. On top of that, they were also being harassed and stalked by current members that did not leave, and they were just trying to make the people who left, they wanted to make their lives hell. Bonnie kind of started a string of people leaving. There were many people who continued staying in the cult, but a lot of people started to see past it and realize that what they've been paying for this whole time was a fluke. Once Nancy and Keith started seeing that people are leaving and kind of seeing past the ESPs, they realized they needed to rebrand. They needed to do something new so that people would stay. So they created something called DOS. DOS stood for Dominus Obsequious Sororium, and it is Latin for Master over Slave Women. It was a pyramid scheme of masters and slaves, and Keith was the Grand Master. He also labeled Nancy Grand Master. This was the most secretive group in NXIVM. A lot of the top-ranked members, including Mark, who was head director of NXIVM, didn't even know about it. It was very secretive and it was only for women, but it was sinister. Keith made it very clear many times that he did not see women as equal to men. He really viewed women as the main reason why they're put on this earth is to obey men and be on the men's side and only listen to men's commands and orders. So that's kind of why he created DOS. The members of DOS would refer to it as the vow, meaning the people who were asked to join this group had to vow that they were only going to be loyal to Keith. In order to get into DOS and be a part of this secretive group, you had to give something called collateral. Now, what that meant was one of your biggest secrets that either you have never told anyone, and it has to be really good. It has to be a really good, juicy secret that they can kind of hold over your head as blackmail if you were to ever try to leave or say something about the group to someone who is not a part of DOS. Now, Allison had started to really climb as Keith's right-hand man. She was at Keith's side at all times. So she is now labeled as a Grand Master along with Keith and Nancy. Keith really trusted her, and she kind of was one of his best followers because she always obeyed the rules and told him when people were being out of line. She was one of those tattletellers, and she was the Robin to his Batman. You know what I mean? It's just remember her because she comes back later. Now, I mentioned earlier that Mark was the head director of NXIVM, so when Keith didn't tell him about this new secretive group being started and it's only for women, Mark had a really weird feeling about it. He was like, I'm one of the top-ranked members, so why am I not hearing of this? When Mark approached Keith to talk about this and explain why he had some concerns, Keith blew it off, said, I'm actually not a part of it. Allison is the one that created this. It's just for the women, so the women had something to do. I don't know. If you have any questions, you should go talk to Allison about it. But Mark saw straight through this because he knew that Keith was someone who didn't see women as equals. So why would he give women something of their own that didn't involve Keith. So Mark knew something was up. Mark could not shake this gut feeling that something was really off about this, so he ultimately made the decision to leave NXIVM, but he wanted to go and talk to Sarah about it first and explain his concerns about this group DOS. When he sits her down, he tells her, like, hey, I have a really weird feeling about this. I don't think that you should be a part of this program, and just whatever you do after I leave, just don't be a part of it. When he's telling Sarah this, Sarah's kind of nonchalantly talking about like, oh yeah, like she just has this tone that she already knows about it. She has this tone of like, I'm withholding a secret, and Mark kind of caught on to it. So Mark is pressuring her by saying like, if you know something about this, you can talk to me, you can trust me, like I'm already leaving, please tell me what's going on if you know what DOS is. And this is when she breaks down crying. She tells him that DOS is true and it's a lot darker than what he thought. She explains that in order to get into DOS, she had to say a secret and she had to give collateral. So she didn't really have any dark secrets. She said that she had to make up something. So what she did was she made up this lie that her ex-husband abused her and their child, just in order to be a part of this group. Now, I want to assert that, like I said, this was a lie. She said that she and her ex-husband actually had a really good relationship and he was not abusive in any way. She just wanted to be a part of this group because it was being labeled as this sorority group, this sisterhood, and so she wanted to be a part of it. So in order for her to be a part of it, she had to make up something. Now, behind this was Lauren Salzman, which was Nancy's daughter. Lauren had climbed the ranks kind of like how Allison did since Nancy recruited her daughter. Lauren is the one that told Sarah to make up something because Sarah and Lauren were kind of friends, and Lauren was like, well, if you really want to be a part of it, just make up something. Now, remember Lauren and why she said this, because this does come back later. The group that was DOS was separated into 4 different groups. Now, these were called pods, and each pod had leaders. So there were 4 pods, so 4 leaders, and Sarah was one of the leaders of the pod. She stated that the 4 leaders were labeled as sisters, and the other members were referred to as sister slaves. And if you brought more people in, it was an opportunity for you to move up. Sarah then lifts up her shirt to reveal her pelvic area where there was a branding initialed into her skin. She said that once you get into the pod, you are basically a sex slave to Keith. She said that you have to continue giving blackmail every single month, almost like rent. At the first of the month, you have to give new blackmail, new collateral to Nancy, Allison, Keith, or Lauren. One day, Sarah showed up and she was forced to strip naked and have a naked photo shoot with Keith because she didn't have any blackmail. So Keith made her do this and he would take photos of her. So that was her new blackmail. Like, if she were to leave or try to leave, he would release these nude photos of her. So she was kind of trapped in this group. She truly was like a slave to the master. So again, the grandmasters, I've explained that. Well, Sarah and Lauren were still friends. So Sarah thought maybe I can go and speak to Lauren about the concerns that I am having, maybe possibly get out of this, but Lauren turned out to be just as awful as Nancy and Keith. Lauren starts to tell Sarah that now that you're a part of this group, you do as I say. So she started to control what Sarah ate, how much she could eat, when she could eat, and even when she could go to sleep. One day, Lauren told Sarah and a bunch of other girls that were part of DOS that they were going to go have a retreat over in Vancouver. She tells them it's going to be good for just the girls to get out. We'll go have some fun. We will kind of bond, get to know each other. We'll get some tattoos. And it was going to truly be like a sorority style trip. But as they're riding along, headed to the Vancouver location, Sarah said she got a really weird feeling, and come to find out, as soon as they got to this location, All of the girls were stripped naked and put blindfolds over their eyes. When all of them were able to take off their blindfolds, they were sitting in a circle with Keith also standing nude in the middle of the circle. He was telling them that this was a bonding experience for them to not be ashamed of their natural bodies, and you need to be vulnerable, and this is a good way for you to start your healing process. Like, it didn't make any sense, and obviously all of the girls, there was a lot of discomfort in the room because these girls thought that it was going to be a bonding retreat with just girls, and now Keith is standing nude in the middle of everyone, and it was just off. This was the first part of the sexual experience, according to Sarah. The women were all blindfolded again and put on the bus, still, not having clothes on, and they were driven to Alice and Mac's mansion over in Vancouver. And while they were there, this is where someone was going to come and give everyone tattoos. Turns out this was not tattoos. This was branding. Sarah said that she was still blindfolded and she got up on the table for her turn to get a tattoo, and all she felt was a burning sensation near her pelvic area. Once they removed her blindfold, she said that she looked down to see crisp flesh near her pelvic area, and she realized that she had been branded, and she said it was one of the worst pains that she had ever experienced. When she looked down, she saw that it was in the shape of the mountains, but when she looked closer, it was the initials KR, otherwise known as Keith Raniere. So he basically branded all of these women as property. If you remember, back in whenever people would own slaves, they were branded so you could know what slaves were whose. So he branded these women to say, like, you are mine, you are my slaves. Like, that is freaking insane to me. Now, as Sarah is explaining this to Mark, she stated that she now knows that this was not some women empowerment sorority group that they had claimed that it was, and it was a recruitment for sex slavery. Sarah said that Keith consistently preached about how women were to be monogamous to men, but since men were able to spread their seed more and had more seed to spread, that they were allowed to be polygamous. Sarah was telling Mark that he would rotate between 15 to 20 women who were all branded with his initials as his sex slaves. He had sexual relationships with all of them starting off. It happened to be way more later on. Because Keith had branded them, they were now property of his, and they were not allowed to have sex with anyone else. They were not allowed to show interest in any other men. They were his and his only. Mark, I don't know why he did this. This probably wasn't the best idea, but he goes to talk to Lauren once he finishes the conversation with Sarah. He goes to tell Lauren that she is literally committing a sex crime. Probably not the best idea, Mark, but go off. He says that sex slavery is illegal and that she is committing a crime. Well, instead of her kind of coming to her senses, she goes and talks to Sarah and gaslights the fuck out of her. She says to Sarah, "This is why we don't want the men involved, because they don't understand. Mark is holding you back from your true potential." All of the women started to have their diet controlled, and they had to take a picture of their meal and wait for a response from one of the Grand Masters to confirm that it's okay to proceed to eat. You also had to send them very descriptive messages about what you're about to eat, how many calories are in it, what the nutritions are, because Keith wanted his women to be a certain weight and look a certain way. And if they didn't approve the meal, you did not get to eat. So because of this, a lot of the women were starting to be malnourished. Many of the girls as well started to get malnourished, and to the point that they literally stopped having their periods. They started to get very sleep deprived, their hair started to thin or even fall out. Their skin started to become so light and grayish that they had a transparent tint to their skin. Now remember when I said girls? They were underage girls. Keith had this fetish for very unhealthy, skinny women who were just really vulnerable and self-conscious. It was an ego thing for him because he was almost repulsed and disgusted by confident, curvy women who were, I don't want to say like thick, even just women who were not just skin and bones. And I don't mean this rudely in any way, because he was definitely controlling them to the point that they became skin and bones. Not at all. He very much probably caused many eating disorders. I couldn't find that he did, but I just want to assert that that's not what I'm saying. He was controlling the women's diet to be skin and bones because that's what he liked. Okay, before I continue, I just needed to clear the air. He just didn't like women who were not skin and bones. Anyone who was just like normal or curvy or just healthy in any way, it bothered him and he was disgusted by it. He wanted his women to be very vulnerable and self-conscious to the point that they only sought their validation through him. And because of him controlling the diets of the women that were in DOS, you could easily spot out the DOS women compared to the other women a part of NXIVM, because they were much skinnier, much more unhealthy than the other women. There were many women in DOS that kind of just said fuck it, and they were like, use my blackmail, use my secrets, I don't care, I need to go. But a lot of women stayed because not only did they not want their blackmail to be released, but all of the validation about themselves was through Keith. They had pretty much been stripped of all of their dignity, and the only thing that they found joy was through Keith because he was giving it to them. The women who did end up leaving filed lawsuits against NXIVM, but there were two women who controlled the financial department. Those two women were Sarah and Claire Bronfman, and they were the head of the financial department who would pay off the lawyers or women who placed the lawsuit. They were the daughters of Edgar Bronfman, who was the creator, if I remember correctly, of Seagram's Liquor. And so they had a financial fortune. They were very, very wealthy. Since they oversaw the finances and also had an insane amount of wealth, it is alleged that they paid over $100 million in hush money and also defrauded the IRS. 15 years after this program's initial start date, there was a man who was a part of NXIVM named Frank Parlato. Frank was hired in 2007 as the publicist for NXIVM, and he was starting to become more and more aware of the dangers of Keith and this group. He found out that Keith was embezzling a lot of money, and when Keith found out that Frank knew, he fired him on the spot. Frank had only been a part of this group for 1 year before he was kicked out, so he made it his mission to expose the secrets of NXIVM after he was kicked out. He wanted to expose how NXIVM was a cult. In 2015, Frank started his website called The Frank Report, where he would use this to expose NXIVM's problematic behavior. Now, Frank is trying to take down NXIVM, but at the same time, the hashtag #MeToo movement started. Sarah took this opportunity to share what happened to her while she was a part of NXIVM by taking a picture of the branding of Keith's initials. Many of the women and girls posting this, along with Frank's research, started a long line of people wondering what was going on with NXIVM and was it a cult? An article came out on Times Union after many of the underage teenage girls came forward and said that they had been recruited to be a part of DOS just to be sexually assaulted. One of the girls that was recruited was only 12 years old. She came out and said that she came to NXIVM with her mom, and Keith had a pretty quick liking to her, which was very weird. He said that if she had sex with him, he had mystical powers, and so you being chosen to have sex with me, you will get to absorb some of these mystical powers. He also kind of manipulated her into doing this as well by saying that it was an honor that he even asked her to share this intimacy with him. At the time that all of this was being exposed, Keith, Nancy, Allison, and Lauren were all hiding out in one of the members' homes in Mexico. But in 2018, the police showed up to this house to arrest him. When they walked in, I've been told two different things. I read an article saying that he was in a closet and Lauren had to be the ones to talk to police to try and kind of stall. But I also read that he was in the middle of one of his recommitment ceremonies, which was basically just a big orgy. I've read both, but either way, he is captured. Keith was facing charges of sex trafficking conspiracy, racketeering, and forced labor conspiracy. In April of 2018, Allison Mack was exposed for being one of the main recruiters for Keith, bringing in numerous amounts of women and underage girls to the DOS group for Keith's sexual desires and pleasures. So, she was arrested on charges of sex trafficking conspiracy, and forced labor conspiracy. It was found out that she was given an insane amount of wealth, insane amount of money, for how many women and girls that she would bring to Keith. It was also said that she reached out to women such as Emma Watson and Kelly Clarkson. Like I said, Keith really wanted the people with the big bucks, so Allison was in charge of recruiting famous women. Thankfully, Emma and Kelly both turned it down, but who knows if they said yes. Allison pled not guilty to her charges, and she was released on a $5 million bond. She did tell New York Times Magazine in an interview that the branding was nothing more than just a bonding experience. It wasn't to be labeled as anything else. She said that it was like a tattoo, but without a meaning. She said that it was like a tattoo, but branding was much more bonding and spiritual, and she said that branding was meaningful. It was also found out that she was one of Keith's sex slaves before, but he allowed her to have one herself, so she branded her own sex slave with her initials, AM. She eventually reversed her plea to guilty, and she was charged with sex trafficking, identity fraud, and money laundering charges. She had to pay about $20,000 and was sentenced to 3 years in prison and 3 years supervised release after she serves her sentence. I think the time away from Keith really helped her. She did eventually tell people that she was very sorry for her actions, and it wasn't until after she had spent time away from Keith that she understood that she was brainwashed. She apologized to all of the victims who were a part of DOS that she recruited. I still think it's bullshit, you know. Since her capture, Allison has been released and she is working as a caterer. She also has enrolled at Berkeley to receive her bachelor's degree. So, good for you, bitch. Claire and Sarah Bronfman, Nancy and Lauren Salzman, and a lady named Kathy Russell were all arrested in 2018 for charges of racketeering conspiracy due to their high involvement in NXIVM. Prosecutors tried to say that all 4 women recruited girls to be sexual partners for Raniere, along with accusing them of harassment, coercion, and abusive litigation to intimidate and attack perceived enemies and critics. Their indictment had multiple crimes listed, including identity theft, harboring of aliens for financial gain, extortion, forced labor, sex trafficking, money laundering, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. Because of all of the main leaders being arrested, NXIVM officially closed its doors in June 2018. Lauren Salzman pled guilty to all of her charges and admitted that she kept a personal slave locked in her home for 2 years. Nancy Salzman pled guilty to racketeering conspiracy on March 13, 2019, and admitted that she hacked emails of NXIVM critics who were trying to expose the secrets, and she monitored the women within the cult. She pled guilty and had to serve 3.5 years in prison and pay a $150,000 fine. Due to what she said in her hearing, only hours later, Keith had new charges being brought against him. Keith faced new charges of child pornography after it was found that Keith had sex with a 15-year-old girl and documented it. From 2005 to 2018, Keith had numerous amounts of child pornography from the women and girls that he assaulted. Now, I say women, not all of this was child pornography. He did document, like I said, even Sarah, who was an adult, had all of these videos and pictures of her from the nude photo shoot. He had done this multiple times with other women. but also young girls, underage girls. Keith's trial started in 2019, and it unraveled much darker things than that was shown on the surface. A woman named Jessica Jones testified against Keith. She stated that Keith and Allison were the most evil monsters she had ever met. She explained that Allison recruited her to join DOS, and she had to give monthly pieces of collateral. She said that in 2017, Allison asked her to seduce Keith and have him take a nude photo of her as proof. Jessica explained that she was a survivor of sexual abuse and she was celibate at the time, and she did not want to do this. But Keith and Allison both had manipulated her into doing so by saying that Keith can heal her of her sexual trauma if she just has sex with him. There was also 3 different sisters who were all underage that fell victims to Keith's antics. All 3 sisters were from Mexico that Keith used to his advantage. At one point, all 3 sisters were pregnant with Keith's baby at one time, but they all ended up having abortions. One of the sisters was groomed from age 15 until she was 18, and then as soon as she turned 18, Keith wasted no time to make her one of the DOS sex slaves. There were also a couple of times that Keith got intimate with 2 sisters at the same time. The 3rd sister, who is the youngest, said that she showed interest in another guy, and so Keith held her captive in his home for 2 years, and she was not allowed to talk to anyone. The only people that she was allowed to talk to was Nancy, Lauren, Keith, and Allison, and that was only whenever they were at the house. Keith used the fact that they were from Mexico to his advantage by telling them that if they ever disobeyed him or they did something that he didn't like, he would threaten them by sending them back to Mexico. So after the 2 years, Keith was tired of withholding her captive in this solitary confinement style. So he tells this girl's father, who was a part of NXIVM, that he needs to drive her from New York all the way to the Mexican border and drop her off and leave her there. And he does just that. This girl's dad was so unbelievably brainwashed that he left his daughter at the Mexican border. Thankfully, she was found, and she chose to stay in Mexico until she testified against Keith later in his trial. The abuse of not just these girls, but so many other girls and women was so extreme that there were alleged suicides, attempts, and just some people completely disappearing. There was a woman named Gina Hutchinson. Gina was recruited at the age of 13, and when she came out and told her story of NXIVM in 2002, she was 23 years old at the time, so approximately 10 years after she first went into NXIVM. She was unfortunately found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound at the age 33, but Frank Perlato said that the way she was found, there was almost absolutely no way. It was physically impossible for her to have shot herself with a shotgun at the angle that she was at. Frank believes that someone at NXIVM shot her and tried to cover it up as a suicide. Another woman who left NXIVM was named Kristen Snyder, and after she left, she has never been seen again. In February 2003, someone called police to report Kristen missing. Kristen was in a lesbian marriage, and her wife stated that Kristen was asked to leave a meeting, but when she walked out of the meeting, she never returned. Her wife stated that this was completely unlike her, and when people started to search for her, her truck was found at a bridge with a suicide note inside. On this note, it said that there was no need for anyone to search for her. There was a police search from the water below. They had some divers, they had a helicopter, but her body still has never been found. Now, earlier I said lesbian marriage. It wasn't to be controversial. The way I said it was kind of weird, but it was because Keith admitted many times that he hated lesbians, and it was because of his beliefs on women and how a woman cannot function unless they're with a man. So it was intimidating when women leaned on each other and didn't need the attention of Keith. So it is alleged that Keith maybe had something to do with her disappearance and possible murder, but again, that is alleged. There was also a few women in the group that were diagnosed with cancer. Now, remember when I said that people's medical insurance was being canceled randomly after they left, and also just the complete control that Keith had over these women? So 2 of the women eventually did pass away, and one woman who also had cancer, who went to an actual doctor after she left, he said that there were dangerous levels in her system of heavy metals, barith and barium. So if she was being treated this way, then the other 2 women who did not seek correct treatment, it was likely that they passed from the dangerous levels of the bismuth and barium in their system. She believed that the 2 women may not have even had cancer, and he was just poisoning these women with these dangerous heavy metals. It also came out in the trial that every single August, which was the month of Keith's birthday, they had a week-long celebration leading up to Keith's birthday. Every single member had to pay $2,000 in the month of August to celebrate Keith. And what it was is to pay for different performances or singers to come, and it was just a week-long celebration, and that's what funded his birthday. So he took his birthday to an extreme. Keith's trial concluded in June 2019, and he was convicted on the following charges: racketeering, sex trafficking, production and possession of child pornography, identity theft, and extortion. When I say identity theft, you remember the multiple credit card charges that people were seeing come up on their account after they left NXIVM? Obviously, that was Keith and his team stealing money from them. Keith was meant to pay $1.75 million in restitution fees, and he had to serve a 120-year prison sentence. His sentencing didn't happen until October 2020 due to COVID. In 2022, Keith was beaten by a different inmate in prison, and it caused a black eye, swelling, nausea, whatever the fuck, I don't care because you deserve it. Apparently, his request to treat his injuries was denied. That's alleged. I don't know if he actually was denied medical care. He's probably just saying that because he's egotistical and stupid. He also created an appeal saying that when the FBI raided his home and found all of the child pornography, that they actually planted it there. He basically said that this was a fraud search and this did not happen and he didn't have child pornography. Nothing has come of that yet. In December 2024 was the last article that I read, and it was basically just like preparing that the FBI has until March 2025 to respond to this appeal. He basically just wants a new trial without the part of the child pornography. Doesn't mean it's going to get any lesser than that. I'm pretty sure they may not change his sentence because it was proven time and time again that he did have sex with underage women. So Keith is being held in a prison right now in Arizona that is specifically for sex offenders. They specialize in sex offender crimes. I don't know what that means, but I do know, you know how everybody says, like, when somebody gets arrested for a sex crime, especially for someone underage, that they hope that they get the same treatment in prison. It's actually known that because people of sex crimes are treated so differently in prison, that they have their own wing, and now I guess their own prison in Arizona. So that doesn't make sense to me. You want sex crimes and sex offenders to all be together so they can talk about the really cool ways that they mistreated children? I really hate America. So Keith is still behind bars. All of the other women who were the grandmasters and main perpetrators in this case are out. They have served their time, paid their dues. I think that they should have gotten, Allison for sure should have gotten more sentence time because of her involvement. Now, if you want a more in-depth story of NXIVM and hearing their survival stories of all of the women and girls, or even Mark is on one of these, you can watch The Vow. You can watch Seduced. Sarah also made a book along with Catherine and India, I think, made a book as well, or maybe just Catherine created a book. And if you want to listen to another podcast format of it, I watched some of it. I didn't finish it, but there's a guy on YouTube named Camp Gagnon, And he has like a 2-hour interview with Frank Parlato. So if you want to watch that, also go check that out because it was interesting from what I did watch. I know that was a tough one to listen to, and how sad it is for the women and the survivors of NXIVM, along with other people. I'm just saying the DOS women specifically. I just, they have that in their skin forever of just that really terrible memory, and it makes me sick and saddened that that is something that they went through and they don't really get to move on from it because it's something that they literally are going to have to carry on them forever. Now, I did watch The Vow. Very good. Oh, the docu-series that's here on YouTube is Seduced, and I think that it kind of starts off with India Oxenberg, the daughter of Catherine Oxenberg. If you want to go listen and watch that one is also very good. Okay, so there we go. There you guys have it. That is the story of Keith Raniere and the sex cult NXIVM. Let me know down below what stories you would like to hear next. Let me know if you have any case suggestions. You can comment down below, or I have my work email down below that you can submit case suggestions to. I still have codes with NordVPN and Movavi that you can check out down below as well. And if you're here on YouTube, please be sure to like, subscribe, and tell your friends. If you're listening on audio only, be sure to rate this podcast 5 stars, download the episode, and share it with friends. Whatever you gotta do. I have been posting a little bit on my Mugshot Mornings TikTok page if you want to go follow that. I've only done one where I like sat down and filmed for it. The other ones I just have short clips for it of previous episodes. But I didn't really want to start it because apparently TikTok's getting banned in like 3 days. All right. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope that you had a good break and you are back and you enjoyed today's video. And I hope we have a great new year. One of my New Year's resolutions is to hit 5,000 subs by the end of the year. So let's pray that we get there. Okay, that's a big jump, but I think we can do it. Thank you guys so much for listening, as always, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye.